DOJ has done in terms of cutting federal spending. There are lots of questions in terms of whether or not this is going to lead to a further slowdown. Can DOJ induce a recession with all of this cutting? And what about the tariffs and the pressure that brings to bear as well?
These tariffs, Cheryl's right on. These tariffs are really scary. And I think you're right. It has a real possibility of bringing on a recession.
When you're losing the folks over at Fox Business, wow. I thought it was important that you see that. Fox Business on the revelation that the guy who filed for bankruptcy 6 times may not be quite so genius at running the country's economy. And it's not just over at Fox. Our friend Sarah Longwell, a longtime pollster, writes in The Atlantic today that many Trump voters who picked Donald Trump over Vice President Kamala Harris because of issues like the rising cost of living may be having some buyer's remorse. She writes this, quote, Trump voters and focus groups are showing signs that they do not believe that Trump's policy priorities are about cheaper groceries. Instead, they see him getting distracted by culture war issues that won't actually improve their lives. Quote, I wanted a lot of change as far as inflation and the price of everything. That's Charlie, a Biden to Trump voter in Georgia, who said that in a focus group last month. Quote, so I haven't seen any real changes there. As a matter of fact, I think for me, things are worse as far as inflation. The market panic, at least, seems to be getting to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is granting a 1-month exemption on his stiff new tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada, specifically for U.S. automakers, as worries and fears persist that his newly launched trade war could crush domestic manufacturing. Trump did not announce what moves, if any, he will take to address the fact that the people who voted for him are still have a lived experience of their bills going up, not down, because of his tariffs. Joining our conversation, and with me at the table, New York Times editorial board member, MSNBC political analyst Mara Gay. We started this conversation in the last block, and I want to pull you in on this. There is a lived experience that is totally grassroots, that can't be manufactured, that doesn't come from a politician lab and get perfected with consultants and ads, and it's voter sentiment. And when you've got people calling into Sean Hannity's talk show about cancer research, when you've got Republicans showing up in ruby red districts, angry about everything from members of Congress abdicating their constitutional role as serving as a check, when you've got the federal cuts really being something that troubles people as they look so clunky and indiscriminate. And then when you see the price of everything from eggs to just about everything else go up with the trade war on the precipice, people feel bad about things.
Yeah, you know, we talk so much, as we have in over years now, about the big lie. And, you know, lately, I would say until January, that really referred to January 6th. But what I think is interesting is that, as it turns out, Donald Trump lied to his supporters by telling them, don't worry, I'm going to fight for you and hurt everyone else. I'm going to hurt liberal America. I'm going to hurt blue America. I'm going to hurt the federal workers who you think of as academics and black postal workers, and they live somewhere else. They're not in your town. You don't have to worry about it. I'm going to take care of you. You're my people. Yeah. And actually, it turns out that that was a lie, that Donald Trump, I believe, exploited a lot of economic uncertainty and a lot of really old racial divisions and tensions in this country and hatreds. And instead, what he's done is install Elon Musk to cut with absolutely no regard to the way this impacts people's lives. And so now we're seeing, of course, the result is that even farmers in the middle of the country, in the deepest red states, are showing up to town halls wanting to know what is happening. And now Republicans, tellingly, I love the guidance that they were given by the NRCC yesterday. Don't have town halls. What does that tell you? I mean,
but like, where are those people? I mean, they still have phones. They still have the idea that that'll stop the political outrage. It is ridiculous.
But it does raise the question. It's like, these aren't popular policies. So the people around Donald Trump, and there's also another element here of how many times did we hear early on in 2016, 2017, 18 from Republicans in the Trump administration privately saying, oh, we think we can control Donald Trump. We can manage him.
Yeah.
I'm here to make things to mitigate the problem. Well, I think that we saw so much of that bullishness from Wall Street, who supported him in the last election, thinking that these money managers thinking, well, Donald Trump's just going to be great. It's going to be all deregulation all the time, and it's just going to be a bonanza. I don't think that the tariffs were something that they thought were going to actually happen. So there's a lot of questions, I think, about who's been taken in at this point.
Yeah. I mean, Tim, I think the other thing that no one seemed to want to say out loud is that this instability is bad for the economy.
Yeah, I never really understood this from the money managers. Every rich person I talked to, I was like, why aren't more people making a risk-reward assessment here on Wall Street or among CEOs just about the instability of Trump, about how erratic he is? And sure, maybe you'll get a tax cut, maybe you'll get a regulation cut you like, but like, what about the downside risk of Trump? And for whatever reason, a lot of these guys just, whether it was out of greed or short-sightedness or whatever you want to give the reason, they didn't take that risk into account. And you're already seeing that start to change. I actually don't think this guy was a Trump supporter this time, but but you're a Mets fan, right, Nicole?
Yes.
Mets fan? Your team, you might want to have your team owner on, because I've been playing this clip from him, Steve Cohen, hedge fund guy, donated to Trump in 2016, was with Christie in the primary this time. So, it's not like a liberal finance person by any means. And he was on a panel a couple of days ago, and he was just succinct about it. He was like, look, if you combine sticky inflation with Trump making it worse with tariffs, with the trade wars making it more uncertain, with some level of austerity at the federal government through DOGE, fewer government spending, fewer jobs, and you put that all together, what you have is a recipe for a very weak economy and possibly even worse than that. And I just think that anybody who is looking at what is happening rationally right now, I think there's particularly among the finance set, they're kind of starting to come around to the reality that they're not going to get just the cookies part of Trump. They're going to get all the bad stuff too. And unfortunately, it's going to be a lot of regular people that end up suffering because of it.
I love that you had to point me to my team's owner making comments about something other than how spring training's going and how Juan Soto is doing.
I want to bring in NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, who's covering the White House. Julie Sirkin is on Capitol Hill with me. In studio, former Florida Republican Congressman David Jolly, an MSNBC political analyst, and Michael Hardaway, former communications director for House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Okay, Congressman, judging by the number of standing O's, I kept looking to see if somebody counted them. I didn't see a number, but there were a lot of them. Republicans are 100% on board with what the president was saying last night. But the other side of that is we clearly know they're getting an earful, at least some of them are, from their constituents. So the Wall Street Journal said Trump is testing Americans' appetite for upheaval. Is he?
Sure. Yeah, look, Republicans are entirely on board, which also means Republicans own it, and they own this environment. And I think two things where last night may not have really landed, and I think we're going to see over the next 60, 90 days what happens. The American people fundamentally want a government that works, and they want an economy that grows. And what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing with DOGE is not just laying off and firing federal employees, they're disrupting federal services. And at some point, the consumers of those federal services are going to say, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. And then secondly, Donald Trump's economy, it's now his economy, is teetering on a real backslide here. The notion of stagflation now in conversation is absolutely real based on the Atlanta Fed's model. We'll see if that occurs or not, but inflation going up and seeing the economy in negative growth territory, if we see that, Donald Trump can no longer blame Joe Biden for that. And frankly, Donald Trump is contributing to the economic uncertainty with tariffs and some of the other moves he's making. So what we saw last night was a lot of truthful hyperbole, Donald Trump's words from his own book. You can call it lies if you want. This was not the most successful 100 days in the history of the country. It was anything but. He's disrupted the most important security alliance on the world stage. Ultimately, the American voters, as consumers of this administration, are going to realize the government's not working for me, and I'm no longer economically confident like I was when Joe Biden left office. Republicans in the chamber that were giving him the standing ovations are going to own that as much as the president does.
So, Michael, if you buy the thesis that patience of the American people is wearing thin, or at least starting to wear thin, what do Democrats do about it?
They have to tell the story. Donald Trump came in and said he'll drive down inflation and drive down prices. He's done the opposite. Our retirement accounts are in the free fall. You got the price of eggs going up, the price of gas going up.
But he said that's because of Joe Biden.
Of course, but that doesn't matter. He's owned this economy because he said that I have a mandate and they control the government. I think voters are smart, and they're smart enough to know that this is Donald Trump's economy. When they go to the store every day and eggs are $11, that is problematic. You fill up the tank, you can't afford $4 or $5 gas, and that is the real issue here.
So, Kelly, where is the administration putting its focus now?
Well, certainly, Chris, part of what they want to do is things like getting the tax cuts that the president talked about renewed in a permanent way. He laid some of that out last night. One of the things that was striking about his extensive address to Congress, the longest in history that we've been recording these, is that he talked very little in the grand sweep of his remarks about what he needs Congress to do. There were a few instances of that, but so often this kind of a speech in the chamber, speaking to both parts of Congress, the Senate and the House, is imploring them to go along with the president to get more done. There was some of that, but not as much as we typically would hear from presidents. In many ways, the president was stitching together his first term and his new term just weeks into office and touting achievements. Part of that is certainly setting the stage for framing his own time in office. He did that extensively. Here's a part of how he took credit and claimed credit for many of the things that he is doing and tried to put a stamp on what he wants to do going forward.
It has been nothing but swift and unrelenting action to usher in the greatest and most successful era in the history of our country. And what makes it even more impressive is that, do you know who number 2 is? George Washington. How about that? How about that?
So through all of that, you get a sense of how the president has a very expansive view of executive power. And while he was happy to have the applause and to use the Democrats to call them out and to highlight the disruptions, he very much is emphasizing that he has a central role in American life now and that he believes he can use that force of both voter support and certainly the support he's seeing in Congress to try to continue to make sweeping changes and to claim big credit for them. Chris?
Thanks so much for that, Kelly. All right, Julie, take us inside Capitol Hill. We know conservative Republicans are meeting with the president today to talk about his agenda and government funding. What are they walking into?
Well, they're walking into the meeting with an expectation that when they're walking out of the White House, they better come around to supporting the year-long clean continuing resolution that many of them have never voted for during their time in Congress. These are fiscal conservatives. These are members of the House Freedom Caucus. So many of them, like Chip Roy, for example, are vehemently opposed to any kind of continuing resolutions. This time around, though, we've already heard a softening in their tone when it comes to that, and it's in large part because Republicans have a strategy of trying to ice Senate Democrats out of this equation. We've been hearing for the last 2 weeks that House Democrats, including the top appropriator in the House, Rosa DeLauro, saying that she will not vote for a bill like this. They want to get certain guarantees, for example, that the administration will actually spend the funds that Congress appropriates. Well, to get around that and to get around Johnson's very razor-thin majority, what the Speaker is trying to do is to work with Trump and to work with the administration to force these House conservatives to support the CR so that when it makes its way to the Senate, they don't really need to rely on any Democrats. Of course, in the Senate, they require a 60-vote threshold. You're going to need Democratic support regardless, which will put them in a bind. Democrats historically not in favor of shutting down governments. And of course, these conservatives, what they were really looking for is that the DOGE cuts be codified in any such continuing resolution. It seems like the president had convinced them to walk off of that ledge. And when it comes to DOGE, by the way, I should note that Elon Musk had just entered the Senate Republican lunch to talk about his process on the cuts. Tonight, he'll also be meeting with House Republicans to address some of their concerns. So a lot of moving parts here, Chris.
Always moving parts. Thank you so much for that, Julie. But Congressman, can Republicans navigate that in any way? If you've been there, if you have a bunch of constituents and they're not happy with you, they're not happy with the way government is going, they're not happy with the way their lives are going.
Right.
What's your option here?
And we haven't seen the worst yet. I want to add a coda to what Julie's saying, because this is important about trying to get the budget done.
Yep.
The budget is 6 months overdue. An annual budget. October 1 is the start of the fiscal year. This is March 1. This Republican Congress has failed already at governing, and they're about to say, okay, we're going to put a Band-Aid on it. Now,
but to be fair, the Band-Aids have been pretty frequent in recent years. It's like, the deadline is a suggestion.
It used to be October 1, the fiscal year got pushed to Christmas, right? And then it was January. Now it's March, and they still don't have an answer. And oh, by the way, this fiscal year, the deadline is September 30th, and they haven't even started that process yet. What does all that mean? I think there's been such a focus on the firing and the laying off of federal workers, but as important as that is, if you're an American voter, you don't necessarily care that the federal workforce is getting laid off. In some ways, you might think that's a good thing, right? Fewer federal employees. What you care about is the deliverables and the resources of the federal government. And there's a latency there that I don't think we've realized. A good example, the VA just shut down its electronic health records interoperability contract, a maybe $10 billion contract. All of the contractors just got laid off and their businesses shut down, but the veterans haven't yet experienced the disruption of their health care. The young man last night, the survivor of brain cancer, that's such a compelling story. At the same time, Donald Trump and Elon Musk are shutting down medical research in the sciences. So at what point do we realize there are fewer cures for young men like that because of what DOGE is doing right now? Right now, the focus is on the breaking of the glass, but the rebuilding of it that's not happening is actually what's going to end up mattering the most.
Yeah, Michael, there's a difference between tearing things down and building them up, right? And the second part is always a lot harder. How do Democrats convince the American people that they're the ones to build things up? I think they tried to do that in November. I keep asking this question, but I don't hear a message that's significantly different than I heard months ago.
Here's the good news. Democrats have done the work in terms of doing the things that improve the lives of the American public. The problem is we don't talk about those things. We don't go home and say, this is what I did for you. We go home and talk about these other social issues that many Americans just don't care about. And so to answer your question, as the American people go through this period of sky-high prices, of the value of their retirement accounts falling, Democrats have to communicate to voters, this is what we stand for, this is what we have done, and now this is what we want to do for you.
So do you think they're doing that do they need to do it in a more aggressive way?
Aggressive and in the districts. Forget Washington, forget television, as much as I hate to say it. They should be in their districts holding town halls.
Shame on you for saying that.
I know, it's awful, I'm sorry. Multiple times a week. That's where they should be. They don't need to be in Washington and being a part of this circus that Donald Trump has stirred up.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Not surprisingly, Donald Trump told a bunch of lies last night in his joint address to Congress. There were small lies, there were big lies, and then there's the big lie. And that is a coordinated campaign of blatant falsehoods to systematically burn down and destroy an institution. We saw Trump do it in 2020 before our very eyes, undermining the legitimacy of America's free and fair elections. We saw him do it last night on the biggest stage, undermining the legitimacy of America's most important safety net for its citizens, Social Security. There is a pattern to what Trump is doing and what he's goading other Republicans into saying. It is a pattern Trump established throughout the 2020 election and its aftermath, all the way up to January 6th and beyond. A deliberate attempt to alter reality with lies about the balloting that were so audacious and so obviously untrue.
They're sending millions of ballots all over the country. There's fraud. They found them in creeks.
We caught them, as you know. It's fraudulent, dropping ballots, doing so many things nobody can even believe it. Dead people voting.
It was a massive dump of votes. And then you get to Detroit, and it's like more votes than people. We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion.
This election
was lost by the Democrats. They cheated. It was a fraudulent election. They flooded the market.
Now, to be clear, those claims were all false. They were laughed out of court dozens and dozens and dozens of times. But Trump was obsessed with convincing his fan base that the voting system in the U.S., gold standard for free and fair elections around the world, was shot through with fraud. I mean, in numbers that were preposterous. And it wasn't a new obsession. I mean, look at these headlines. Donald Trump warns vote could be rigged. Trump ratchets up rigged election claims, which Pence downplays. Donald Trump's rigged election claims raise historical alarms. All of these headlines were from the 2016 election campaign, the election Trump ultimately won in the Electoral College. He didn't challenge that outcome. But once he lost in 2020, Trump went back to his old playbook, this well-established playbook, particularly the myth of dead people voting for Democrats. This has been a fringe right-wing talking point for years, and Trump elevated the lie to new prominence. He used it in his, quote, perfect phone call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to pressure his fellow Republicans into basically a coup, into rigging the state's vote totals to favor Trump, even though he lost the state. And Raffensperger debunked that lie in his testimony to the January 6th committee.
The other thing, dead people. So dead people voted, and I think the number is in the close to 5,000 people. And they went to obituaries. They went to all sorts of methods to come up with an accurate number, and a minimum is close to about 5,000 voters.
Mr. Secretary, did your office investigate whether those allegations were accurate? Did 5,000 dead people in Georgia vote?
No, it's not accurate. And actually, in their lawsuits, they alleged 10,315 dead people. We found 2 dead people when I wrote my letter to Congress that's dated January 6th. And subsequent to that, we found 2 more. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 people, not 4,000, but just a total of 4.
Now, Trump's lies had a purpose, right? The purpose is to destroy faith in the electoral system so as to overthrow American democracy, to destroy that faith so that you can destroy the institution itself. And he rolled out the same play last night as he blasted out his new big lie about a beloved government program, one that Republicans have long hated, but that 71 million Americans currently rely on.
We're also identifying shocking levels of incompetence and probable fraud in the Social Security program. Believe it or not, government databases list 4.7 million Social Security members from people aged 100 to 109 years old. It lists 3.6 million people from ages 110 to 119. I don't know any of them. I know some people that are rather elderly, but not quite that elderly. But we're going to find out where that money's going, and it's not going to be pretty.
Identical, right? He sees dead people again. The dead people voting in the Georgia election, the dead people getting checks from Social Security, all the dead people committing fraud. Suggesting that Americans who died long ago are still having their Social Security checks delivered to someone and somehow cashing them in their name, even though they're dead and there's a death certificate. Again, think about it for 20 seconds. It's obviously preposterous. In fact, a government investigation last year found that from 2015 through 2022, 7 years, of all the money the agency paid out in benefits, and that is $8.6 trillion, a staggering sum, less than 1% was improper payments. That's a really good record. And most of the erroneous payments were overpayments to living people. I mean, again, think about this, right? In the same way if you think through the dead people voting at scale issue. If you have ever had a loved person die when they were on Social Security, you know the checks don't keep coming. Also, Social Security automatically stops payments to people who are 115 years old. It's capped there, which I'm sure is a bureaucratic headache for the handful of Americans who lived that long. The version of the lie Trump and his unelected co-president Elon Musk are telling appears to be based on their inability to read the data they collected, because Social Security's software system necessitates that some entries with missing or incomplete birth dates will default to a reference point of more than 150 years ago. I don't know the origins of this, but here's the thing. The fraud claims are bunk. They're totally false. It's just the big lie about voting again. Dead people voting. But just like they did with the election big lie, Republicans are amplifying it.
What he's finding with his algorithms crawling through the data of Social Security system is enormous amounts of fraud, waste, and abuse.
Tens of millions of deceased people who are receiving fraudulent Social Security payments.
More than 13 million people on the records receiving benefits who are over 119 years old.
I'm shocked enough. Who do we have at 200 years old, or who do we have older than America that's getting Social Security?
Everybody whose grandfather died and is still getting Social Security? Give me a break.
Yeah. They're lies. They are lying. Those are all lies. It's not happening, okay? Millions of people, millions? Here's the thing. They want to destroy Social Security. They are coming for Social Security. Musk has already installed someone from DOGE at the Social Security Administration. The agency has already announced enormous layoffs. They're already closing offices. This is going to make things start to break there. Last weekend, the previous Social Security Administrator, Martin O'Malley, warned that Trump and DOGE were breaking the whole agency, saying, quote, ultimately, you're going to see the system collapse and an interruption of benefits. I believe you will see that within the next 30 to 90 days. People should start saving now. Like, I don't know if that's a credible prediction. I really don't know. Social Security is an amazing and robust system, right? But it's an incredible statement. Given that Social Security has never missed a monthly payment in 90 years, it is a program, like our voting system, that is incredibly free of fraud, incredibly efficiently run, insanely popular with the American populace, just like free and fair elections. So keep your eye on the ball here, right? Huge tip-off last night of what they're about to do. Trump knows all this. Musk knows all this. It's why they are telling the big lie about Social Security. Just like the big election lie. The objective now, as it was then, is to fabricate this elaborate, grotesque lie about a cherished institution of American government to sow enough fear, doubt, and uncertainty among enough people that Trump can get away with destroying it.
And joining us now, Brookings Institution Senior Fellow in Governance Studies, Elaine Kamarck. Elaine, good to have you back. Donald Trump was touting all of the cuts that he's made with Elon Musk last night. He was touting the tariffs. He was touting all of the, what he describes as his accomplishments so far in the past 6 weeks. How have you seen them? What stood out to you?
Look, I did this in the Clinton administration, okay? I was a government employee who had to put in a financial statement. I had to take security class tests, et cetera, and get a security clearance. None of this has Musk had to do. The big difference, though, is between what we did 32 years ago in the Clinton administration and now is that they are doing many things which nobody thinks are legal. So just yesterday, there was another federal court decision that said, and it was funny the way he phrased it, the judge said, under no law in American history, nor any law in the universe, does OPM have the authority to hire and fire people outside of their agency. So this whole thing is on very tenuous legal grounds and has been from the beginning.
Musk's involvement on this, I wonder if it's going to go down as, if the American public is going to find it distasteful eventually. I mean, he's the guy, richest guy in the world, and he's going and he's bragging about firing people, cutting out government programs. He called Social Security a Ponzi scheme the other day. Does that end up backfiring? I know the American public has been able to stomach a lot, or just hasn't seen the way Donald Trump speaks about things the same way that past presidents have seen it, the way that we've, the decorum that we usually abide by. I wonder if it's ever going to catch up to them.
Oh, it's going to catch up with them. In fact, what Trump and Musk are doing, even though I'm not sure they realize it, is they're planting time bombs all through the federal government. And the time bombs are going to blow up on them as soon as something goes wrong. They cut people from NOAA last week. That's the National Oceanic and Aerospace Administration. So the next time there's a hurricane and there's not a lot of notice, guess what? People are going to say, hey, the people who are supposed to giving us give us plenty of notice, they seem to be asleep at the switch. And they're fooling around with Social Security. And that, of course, is the third rail of American politics. You just don't do it. The minute people start getting their checks late or get inaccurate checks, or the minute people who are turning 67 years old and want to sign up for Social Security go to do it and they can't do it because there's not enough people to sign them up, this is going to backfire. And it's careless, it's chaotic, it's not the way to cut the government. And I'm a person who is in big favor of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse and cutting workers, et cetera. But you've got to do it in a way that doesn't impact operations. And so far, they've shown no sensitivity to what the government actually does that the vast majority of American people want the government to do.
Yeah, the government has grown dramatically over the years. Do you have a positive reading for anything that they're doing right now?
Well, first of all, the government hasn't grown dramatically over the years.
Oh, it hasn't? Please correct me.
No, it hasn't. Yeah, the federal government has been between 3 million and 2.7 million for decades and decades. America has grown. The contractors have grown, but in fact, look at Social Security right now. It has about 75, 80,000 people, which is about the same amount of people it has had for a long time. And yet what they're in the middle of doing now is retiring the baby boom. And the baby boom is the biggest generation we've ever had in American history so far, until our kids came along. Okay, but they're retiring the baby boom on basically the same number of employees that they were using 2 decades ago. So there isn't growth. Now, where there is growth is there's growth in contractors, and and they are looking at contractors, so that's probably a good idea, although they can't just they don't have the authority to just cancel contracts, as the Supreme Court just told them. So the government has grown there, and the government has grown in entitlements. There's simply more old people, and we're spending more and more on Social Security.
Give me this. It's become much less efficient over the years.
Well, yes and no. Okay, yes and no. There are places where it's tied up in its own red tape. Okay, and there's places where they haven't figured out how to use new technology like AI as efficiently as they should. So they need to catch up. The government is always running a little bit behind the private sector. And government has way too many regulations. In fact, when DOGE started, they said they were going to do a regulatory review. That's one of the things we did in the Clinton administration. And we cut 16,000 pages out of the federal regulations. And I thought, okay, good. That's a very good thing to do periodically, because the regulations are a little bit like that plant kudzu. They just start growing and growing and growing, and you've got to at some point cut them back. Yeah. So there's a lot of places where the government needs a review. We need fewer regulations. In some places, we need fewer people, but we need that to be done in a way that is not disrupting important things. Taking the chainsaw to the government is exactly the wrong way to do it.
Finding a way for the government to work faster and more efficiently is a good idea. I mean, passing
absolutely.
legislation for billions of dollars in investment and getting that investment done and people hired and the work going quickly is something that definitely can be improved upon. I think Democrats are probably thinking that now, given all that they were able to pass during the Biden administration that wasn't able to get online fast enough. Elaine Kamarck, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. Is anyone on Capitol Hill worried about tariffs? Anyone with an R in front of their name, Ryan?
Well, good thing you clarified that, because there's a whole bunch of members of Congress that are really worried about tariffs, and most of them are Democrats. But I do think that there are some Republicans that are raising tepid concern about the way that the president is going about this. They're always reluctant to actually directly criticize him, but there are worries about the form and fashion that this is playing itself out. Now, they're willing to give Donald Trump some latitude here. Many of the Republicans that you talk to, when you ask them about this tariff proposal, they're not necessarily a fan of tariffs themselves, but they are a fan of Donald Trump as a deal maker, and they believe that this is a tool in his toolbox to try and cut deals with Canada, with Mexico, with China and beyond. And so they're giving him some space there. How long that space exists for remains to be seen. And it also is really a test of Donald Trump's broader political will. And where you're really going to start to see Republicans start to speak out is when they're hearing it from their constituents. And Trump has, to a certain degree, conditioned his supporters to say, listen, you're going to feel some pain. It's going to be OK. We're going to get over it. So will there be an outcry, particularly in these red districts right at the beginning, even if folks are paying more because they feel confident that Trump can get them out of it? Or is this going to be something that as soon as they go to the liquor store, as soon as they go to the gas station, as soon as they go to get the oil change and they see that price bump, that they start to get upset about it and then blame Donald Trump for it? That right now is still an open question, Katie, that may take some time to answer.
Even know about it? Because we've heard that Republicans are being told not to hold town halls when they go back home.
Yeah, well, town halls aren't the only way they hear from their constituents, right? Their phone lines could be burning up with calls from their constituents. They could get emails. There is a wide range of ways for them to communicate with their constituents, even if they're not specifically doing town halls. The one thing I've learned covering politics for a long time is that when a constituent group wants to get a message to a lawmaker, there are ways to get that message to those lawmakers. The question is, will these Republicans receive it? We've seen in many instances them downplay the impacts of these town halls, saying that they're just paid troublemakers, as Donald Trump called them, that they're outside Democratic activists that aren't part of their district, and they're really not listening to what their constituents are saying. When their constituents are complaining about tariffs, will they treat that complaint the same way that they're treating these town halls? That's something that we need to keep an eye on.
I guess they'll ultimately find out whether they get elected again at the end of the day, at the end of this 2 years. Peter Baker, the question that I still have is, what exactly does Donald Trump want? Say he's using these tariffs as a leverage tool and that he really wants to get a better deal from Canada, from Mexico. What is a better deal? He's talking about fentanyl. We send more fentanyl to Canada than they send to us. It's like 1%. It's almost nothing. It's not nothing, but it is almost nothing. Justin Trudeau seems to think that what Donald Trump is doing with these tariffs is he's trying to hollow out the Canadian economy to make it easier to absorb Canada into America as the 51st state.
Well, look, you're absolutely right to ask the question because the president's been all over the map when he describes what he's trying to do with these tariffs. You're right. He talks about fentanyl, but you're right also that less than 1% comes from Canada. That can't obviously be worth all the economic disruption that he's about to impose through these tariffs. He talks about trade imbalances. He talks about unfair trade practices with these trading partners. But remember, the rules that we currently have for trading with Mexico and Canada were set by an agreement negotiated by Donald Trump in his first term. He's the one who told us that the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that he negotiated, was a great deal. So now he's telling us that it's not a great deal, even though he's not taking blame for that and saying that he needs to make changes through these tariffs. Or is it like what Trudeau says? Now, you know, does Donald Trump really think he's going to annex or somehow absorb Canada? It's hard to say for sure. It seems pretty farcical, but I suppose it shouldn't be taken lightly. Certainly Trudeau's not taking it lightly. So the Canadians aren't taking it lightly. And it's actually affecting their politics right now in a big way.
Yeah, we're seeing what is just uncharacteristic animosity from the Canadians toward Americans. You had one mayor, I think it was of Manitoba, saying that they're going to take all American liquor off the shelf. You're hearing the national anthem booed at hockey games. You're seeing people wear Made in America shirts, trying to find that, antagonizing other shoppers when they may be reaching for maple syrup that comes from Vermont. What are you doing? Take maple syrup that comes from Canada. It's not, we've been such close friends for so long. It's just a strange position to be in, to find that our closest neighbor to the north is suddenly feels more like, not our enemy, but we don't feel like we're comfortable buddies any longer.
Yeah, what does it tell you about how radically Donald Trump has reoriented foreign policy, that Canada is the adversary and Russia is the friend? That's what's happened in the last 6 weeks, right? He said nicer things about Vladimir Putin than he has about Justin Trudeau, and he seems to be more willing to cater to Russia's national interests than to Canada's at national interests. And you're right, it's mind-boggling in some ways, because since the War of 1812, anyway, we've had a pretty good relationship with Canada, pretty symbiotic in most things. Canada is the one that went to war with us time and time again, whether it be in Europe, whether it be in the Middle East. Canada and the United States jointly operate, the North American defense operations in terms of, preparing for possible nuclear attacks. I mean, Canada and the United States are so close that the border has been pretty much undefended for all these years because, of course, nobody really seemed to see a big difference between the two. Now, suddenly, to see them hostile towards us and us hostile toward them, really because of Donald Trump, it's something we never, I think, imagined.
No, certainly not. John Nichols, I want to play Elissa Slotkin from last night, because she did seem to home in on a Democratic message, a singular Democratic message in this moment where everything is so chaotic. Here she is talking about what Donald Trump promised and what he has so far delivered.
Look, the president talked a big game on the economy, but it's always important to read the fine print. So, do his plans actually help Americans get ahead? Not even close. President Trump is trying to deliver an unprecedented giveaway to his billionaire friends. He's on the hunt to find trillions of dollars to pass along to the wealthiest in America. And to do that, he's going to make you pay in every part of your life. Grocery and home prices are going up, not down, and he hasn't laid out a credible plan to deal with either of those. His tariffs on allies like Canada will raise prices on energy, lumber, and cars, and start a trade war that will hurt manufacturing and farmers. Your premiums and prescriptions will cost more because the math on his proposals doesn't work without going after your health care.
This is Elissa Slotkin, brand new senator from Michigan, speaking from a place that both she won and Donald Trump won.
That's exactly right. And look, that's where sort of the sweet spot is for Democrats, right? One of the things that they know is that Donald Trump brings out voters. I mean, voters who want to vote for him. That shouldn't be denied. But that when he's not on the ballot, and he won't be on the ballot in the midterm elections, there's a portion of folks that don't show up. That's right there an opening for Democrats. And then you have the next opening, this notion that some portion of folks who voted for Donald Trump and who voted Republican in 2024 are going to be profoundly disappointed because they're not seeing that shift in the economy that they wanted. Remember, Donald Trump didn't promise that he would make the economy a little better. He promised during the campaign that he would make it dramatically better. Now, the moves he's making are dramatic. There's no question of that. These tariff initiatives are huge. But we're hearing from an awfully lot of folks in industrial settings who worry about, whether parts are going to show up, worry about whether they're going to have markets. A lot of farmers, and remember, Donald Trump did great in rural America. Hearing from an awfully lot of farmers, especially at this time of year. This is when you're buying seed or you've just finished buying seed and you're preparing to go out into those fields once winter is done. And having a period of deep uncertainty, not knowing how much to plant, where to do it, what to do, what to plant. I mean, that's the sort of thing that creates an opening for, the other party, for the Democrats to deliver a message. I think Slotkin started to do it there last night. But frankly, I think that after the incredibly long speech by Donald Trump, I'm not sure how many people heard that. Ultimately, for the Democrats, the key is to have a consistent message on tariffs and on the economy. If they do, we'll see the first measures of how effective that message is in some of the special elections that are coming up and ultimately in this year's off-year elections.
Yeah, and we'll see if those rural communities, those farmers, for instance, that voted for Donald Trump, stick by him. They did, and they have. Even though there was pain during the first administration, does that continue? John Nichols, Peter Baker, Ryan Nobles, gentlemen, thank you very much.